Well, I think it's about time. My clocks are all on different, I don't know what it is. I'm going to have to spend some time coordinating. But anyway, I'm assuming it's close on to 6 o'clock. Let's see, yes, according to this, it's 6 o'clock. So if it's 6 o'clock, and this is definitely Wednesday, it's time for Tales and Cocktails. So, my dears, tonight a treat. A short story by P.G. Wodehouse. Now, Wodehouse was the author of his name was Pelham Granville Wodehouse, W-O-D-E House, pronounced Wodehouse. He was the author of almost 100 books and the creator of wonderful characters and places: Jeeves, Blanding's Castle, Uxbridge, Uncle Fred, etc., etc. He was born in 1881 and educated at Dulwich College. After 2 years with the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, he became a full-time writer, contributing to a variety of periodicals, including Punch and The Globe. He married in 1914. As well as his novels and short stories, he wrote lyrics for musical comedies with Guy Bolton and Jerome Kern, and at one time had 5 musicals running simultaneously on Broadway. His time in Hollywood also provided much source material for fiction. At the age of 93, in the New Year's Honors List of 1975, he received a long overdue knighthood, only to die on St. Valentine's Day some 45 days later. Now, about his writing, here are just a few comments. First, by Julian Fellowes, the author of Gosford Park and Downton Abbey. P.G. Wodehouse remains the greatest chronicler of a certain kind of Englishness that no one else has ever captured quite so sharply or with quite as much wit and affection. And from Simon Callow, I have recorded all the Jeeves books, and I can tell you this: it's like singing Mozart. The perfection of the phrasing is a physical pleasure. I doubt if any writer in the English language has more perfect music. So tonight's short story by P.G. Wodehouse is entitled Goodbye to All Cats. As the club kitten sauntered into the smoking room of the Drones Club and greeted those present with a friendly meow, Freddie Widgeon, who had been sitting in a corner with his head between his hands, rose stiffly. "I had supposed," he said, in a cold, level voice, "that this was a quiet retreat for gentlemen. As I perceive that it is a blasted zoo, I will withdraw." And he left the room in a mocked manner. There was a good deal of surprise, mixed with consternation. "What's the trouble?" asked an egg, concerned. Such exhibitions of the naked emotions are rare at the Drones. Have they had a row? A crumpet, always well informed, shook his head. "Freddie has had no personal breach with this particular kitten," he said. "It is simply that since that weekend at Matcham Scratchings, he can't stand the sight of a cat." Matcham what? Scratchings, the ancestral home of Dahlia Prenderby, it's in Oxfordshire. "I met Dahlia Prenderby once," said the egg. "I thought she seemed a nice girl." Freddie thought so too. He loved her madly. And lost her, of course. Absolutely. "Do you know," said a thoughtful being, "I'll bet that if all the girls Freddie Wigton has loved and lost were placed end to end, not that I suppose anyone could do it, They would reach halfway down Piccadilly. Further than that, said the egg. Some of them were pretty tall. What beats me is why he ever bothers to love them. They always turn him down in the end. He might just as well never begin. Better, in fact, because in the time saved, he could be reading some good book. I think the trouble with Freddie, said the Crumpet, is that he always gets off to a flying start. He's a good-looking sort of chap who dances well and can wiggle his ears, and the girl is dazzled for the moment, and this encourages him. From what he tells me, he appears to have gone very big with this Prenderby girl at the outset. So much indeed that when she invited him down to Matcham Scratches, he had already bought his copy of What Every Young Bridegroom Ought to Know. Rummy, these old country house names, mused the Bean. Why Scratchings, I wonder? Freddie wondered too, till he got to the place. Then he tells me he felt it was absolutely the mot juste. This girl Dahlia's family, you see, was one of these animal-loving families, and the house, he tells me, was just a frothing maelstrom of dumb chums. As far as the eye could reach, there were dogs scratching themselves and cats scratching the furniture. I believe, though he never met it socially, there was even a tame chimpanzee somewhere on the premises, no doubt scratching away as assiduously as the rest of them. You get these conditions here and there in the depths of the country, and this Matcham place was well away from the center of things, being about 6 miles from the nearest station. It was at this station that Dahlia Prenderby met Freddie in her 2-seater, and on the way to the house, there occurred a conversation which I consider significant, showing as it does the cordial relations existing between the young couple at this point in the proceedings. I mean, it was only later that the bitter awakening and all that sort of thing popped up. I do want you to be a success, Freddie, said the girl, after talking a while of this and that. Some of the men I've asked down here have been such awful flops. The great thing is to make a good impression on father. I will, said Freddie. He can be a little difficult at times. Lead me to him, said Freddie. That's all I ask. Lead me to him. The trouble is he doesn't much like young men. He'll like me. He will he? Rather. What makes you think that? I'm a dashed fascinating chap. Oh, you are? Yes, I am. You are you? Rather. Upon which she gave him a sort of push, and he gave her a sort of push, and she giggled, and he laughed like a paper bag bursting, and she gave him a kind of shove, and he gave her a kind of shove, and she said, "You are a silly ass," and he said, "What-ho?" All of which shows you, I mean to say, the stage they had got to by this time. Nothing definitely settled, of course, but love obviously beginning to burgeon in this girl's heart. Well, naturally, Freddie gave a good deal of thought during the drive to this father of whom the girl had spoken so feelingly, and he resolved that he would not fail her. The way he would suck up to the old dad would be nobody's business. He proposed to exert upon him the full force of his magnetic personality, and looked forward to registering a very substantial hit. Which being so, I need scarcely tell you, knowing Freddie as you do, that his first act on entering Sir Mortimer Prenderby's orbit was to make the scaliest kind of floater, hitting him on the back of the neck with a tortoiseshell cat, not 10 minutes after his arrival. His train having been a bit late, there was no time on reaching the house for any stately receptions or any of that. Welcome to the Meadowsweet Hall stuff. The girl simply shot him up to his room and told him to dress like a streak because dinner was in a quarter of an hour, and then buzzed off to don the soup and fish herself. And Freddie was just going well when, looking around for his shirt, which he had left on the bed, he saw a large tortoiseshell cat standing on it, kneading it with its paws. Well, you know how a fella feels about his shirt front. For an instant, Freddie stood spellbound. Then, with a hoarse cry, he bounded forward, scooped up the animal, and carrying it out onto the balcony, flung it into the void. And an elderly gentleman, coming round the corner at this moment, received a direct hit on the back of his neck. "Hell!" cried the elderly gentleman. A head popped out of a window. "Whatever's the matter, Mortimer? It's raining cats." "Nonsense. It's a lovely evening," said the head, and disappeared. Freddie thought an apology would be in order. "I say," he said. The old gentleman looked in every direction of the compass and finally located Freddie on his balcony. "I say," said Freddie, "I'm awfully sorry you got that nasty buffet. It was me." "It was not you. It was a cat." "I know. I threw the cat." "Why?" "Well, damn fool." "I'm sorry," said Freddie. "Go to blazes," said the old gentleman. Freddie backed into the room, and the incident closed. Freddie is a pretty slippy dresser as a rule, but this episode had shaken him, and he not only lost a collar stud, but made a mess of the first two ties. The result was that the gong went while he was still in his shirt sleeves, and on emerging from his boudoir, he was informed by a footman that the gang were already nuzzling their bouillon in the dining room. He pushed straight on there, accordingly, and sank into a chair beside his hostess, just in time to dead heat with the final spoonful. Awkward, of course, but he was feeling in pretty good form, owing to the pleasantness of the thought that he was shoving his knees under the same board as the girl Dahlia. So, having nodded to his host, who was glaring at him from the head of the table, as much as to say that all would be explained in God's good time, he shot his cuffs and started to make sparkling conversation to Lady Prenderby. "Charming place you have here, what?" Lady Prenderby said that the local scenery was generally admired. She was one of those tall, rangy Queen Elizabeth sort of women with tight lips and cold blancmange eyes. Freddie didn't like her looks much, but he was feeling, as I say, fairly fizzy, so he carried on with a bright zip. "Pretty good hunting country, I should think." "I believe there is a good deal of hunting near here, yes." "I thought as much," said Freddie. "Ah, that's the stuff. Is it not? A cracking gallop across good country with a jolly fine kill at the end of it. What? Hark forward, yoinks, tally-ho, I mean to say, and all that sort of thing." Lady Prenderby shivered austerely. "I fear I cannot share your enthusiasm," she said. "I have the strongest possible objection to hunting. I have always set my face against it, as against all similar brutalizing blood sports." This was a nasty jar for poor old Freddie, who had been relying on the topic to carry him nicely through at least a couple of courses. It silenced him for the nonce, and as he paused to collect his faculties, his host, who had now been glowering for 6.5 minutes, practically without cessation, put a hand in front of his mouth and addressed the girl Dahlia across the table. Freddie thinks he was under the impression that he was speaking in a guarded whisper, but as a matter of fact, the words boomed through the air as if he had been a costermonger calling attention to his Brussels sprouts. "Dahlia." "Yes, father?" "Who's that ugly feller?" Hush! What do you mean, hush? Who is he? Mr. Widgeon. Mr. who? Widgeon. I wish you would articulate clearly and not mumble, said Sir Mortimer fretfully. It sounds to me just like Widgeon. Who asked him here? I did. Why? He's a friend of mine. Well, he looks a frightful young slab of damnation to me. What I'd call a criminal face. Hush! Why do you keep saying hush? Must be a lunatic, too. Throws cats at people. Please, Father. Don't say please, Father. No sense in it. I tell you, he does throw cats at people. He threw one at me. Half-witted, I'd call him. If that. Besides being the most offensive-looking young toad I've ever seen on the premises. How long is he staying? Till Monday. My God, and today's only Friday, bellowed Sir Mortimer Prenderby. It was an unpleasant situation for Freddie, of course, and I'm bound to admit he didn't carry it off particularly well. What he ought to have done, obviously, was to have plunged into an easy flow of small talk, but all he could think of was to ask Lady Prenderby if she was fond of shooting. Lady Prenderby having replied that, owing to being deficient in the savage instincts and wanton bloodlust that went to make up a callous and cold-blooded murderess, she was not. He relapsed into silence, with his lower jaw hanging down. All in all, he wasn't so dashed sorry when dinner came to an end. As he and Sir Mortimer were the only men at the table, most of the seats having been filled by a covey of mildewed females, whom he had classified under the general heading of aunts, it seemed to Freddie that the moment had now arrived when they would be able to get together once more, under happier conditions than those of their last meeting, and start to learn to appreciate one another's true worth. He looked forward to a cozy tete-a-tete over the port, in the course of which he would smooth over the cat incident and generally do all that lay within his power to revise the unfavorable opinion of him which the other must have formed. But apparently Sir Mortimer had his own idea of the duties and obligations of a host. Instead of clustering round Freddie with decanters, he simply gave him a long, lingering look of distaste and shot out of the French window into the garden. A moment later his head reappeared, and he uttered the words, "You and your damn cats!" Then the night swallowed him again. Freddie was a good deal perplexed. All this was new stuff to him. He had been in and out of a number of country houses in his time, but this was the first occasion on which he had ever been left flat at the conclusion of the evening meal, and he wasn't quite sure how to handle the situation. He was still wondering when Sir Mortimer's head came into view again, and its owner, after giving him another of those long, lingering looks, said, "Cats, forsooth," and disappeared once more. Freddie was now definitely piqued. It was all very well, he felt, Dahlia Prenderby telling him to make himself solid with her father. But how can you make yourself solid with a father who doesn't stay put for a couple of consecutive seconds? If it was Sir Mortimer's intention to spend the remainder of the night flashing past like a merry-go-round, there seemed little hope of anything amounting to a genuine rapprochement. It was a relief to his feelings when there suddenly appeared from nowhere his old acquaintance, the tortoiseshell cat. It seemed to offer him a means of working off his spleen. Taking from Lady Prenderly's plate, accordingly, the remains of a banana, he plugged the animal at a range of 2 yards. It yowled and withdrew, and a moment later there was Sir Mortimer again. "Did you kick that cat?" said Sir Mortimer. Freddie had half a mind to ask this old disease if he thought he was a man or a jack-in-the-box, but the breeding of the Widgeons restrained him. "No," he said, "I did not kick that cat." "You must have done something to it to make it come charging out at 40 miles an hour. "I merely offered the animal a piece of fruit." "Do it again and see what happens to you." "Lovely evening," said Freddie, changing the subject. "No, it's not, you silly ass," said Sir Mortimer. Freddie rose. His nerve, I fancy, was a little shaken. "I shall join the ladies," he said with dignity. "God help them," replied Sir Mortimer Prenderby in a voice filled with the deepest feeling, and vanished once more. Freddie's mood as he made for the drawing-room was thoughtful. I don't say he has much sense, but he's got enough to know when he is and when he isn't going with a bang. Tonight he realized he had been very far from going in such a manner. It was not, that is to say, as the idol of Matcham scratchings that he would enter the drawing-room, but rather as a young fellow who had made an unfortunate first impression and would have to do a lot of heavy ingratiating before he could regard himself as really popular in the home. He must bustle about, he felt, and make up leeway. And knowing that what counts with these old-style females who have lived in the country all their lives is the exhibition of those little politenesses and attentions which were all the go in Queen Victoria's time, his first action on entering was to make a dive for one of the aunts who seemed to be trying to find a place to put her coffee cup. "Permit me," said Freddie, suave to the eyebrows. Oh, bounding forward with the feeling that this was the stuff to give them, he barged right into a cat. "Oh, sorry," he said, backing and bringing down his heel on another cat. "I say, most frightfully sorry," he said, and tottering to a chair, he sank heavily onto a third cat. Well, he was up and about again in a jiffy, of course, but it was too late. There was the usual "not at all, Ing," and "don't mention it, Ing," but he could read between the lines. Lady Prenderby's eyes had rested on his for only a brief instant, but it had been enough. His standing with her, he perceived, was now approximately what King Herod's would have been at an Israelite mother's social Saturday afternoon. The girl Dahlia, during these exchanges, had been sitting on a sofa at the end of the room, turning the pages of a weekly paper, and the sight of her drew Freddie like a magnet. Her womanly sympathy was just what he felt he could do with at this juncture. Treading with infinite caution, he crossed to where she sat, and having scanned the terrain narrowly for cats, sank down on the sofa at her side. And conceived his agony of spirit when he discovered that womanly sympathy had been turned off at the main. The girl was like a chunk of ice cream with spikes all over it. "Please do not trouble to explain," she said coldly, in answer to his opening words. "I quite understand that there are people who have this odd dislike of animals." "But dash it," cried Freddie, waving his arm in a frenzied sort of way. "Oh, I say sorry," he added, as his fist slashed another of the menagerie in the short ribs. Dahlia caught the animal as it flew through the air. "I think perhaps you had better take Augustus, Mother," she said. "He seems to be annoying Mr. Widgeon." "Quite," said Lady Prenderby. "He will be safer with me." "But dash it," bleated Freddie. Dahlia Prenderby drew in her breath sharply. "How true it is," she said, "that one never really knows a man till after one has seen him in one's own house." What do you mean by that? Oh, nothing, said Dahlia Prenderby. She rose and moved to the piano, where she proceeded to sing old Breton folk songs in a distant manner, leaving Freddie to make out as best he could with a family album containing faded photographs with Aunt Emily bailing at Llandudno, 1893, and this is Cousin George at the fancy dress ball written under them. So the long, quiet, peaceful home evening wore on, till eventually Lady Prenderby mercifully blew the whistle, and he was at liberty to sneak off to his bedroom. You might have supposed that Freddie's thoughts, as he toddled upstairs with his candle, would have dwelt exclusively on the girl Dahlia. This, however, was not so. He did give her obvious shirtiness, a certain measure of attention, of course, but what really filled his mind was the soothing reflection that at long last his path and that of the animal kingdom of Matcham Scratchings had now divided. He, so to speak, was taking the high road, while they, as it were, would take the low road. For whatever might be the conditions prevailing in the dining room, the drawing room, and the rest of the house, his bedroom, he felt, must surely be a haven totally free from cats of all descriptions. Remembering, however, that unfortunate episode before dinner, he went down on all fours and subjected the various nooks and crannies to a close examination. His eye could detect no cats. Relieved, he rose to his feet with a gay song on his lips, and he hadn't got much beyond the first couple of bars when a voice behind him suddenly started taking the bass, and turning, he perceived on his bed a fine Alsatian dog. Freddie looked at the dog. The dog looked at Freddie. The situation was one fraught with embarrassment. A glance at the animal was enough to convince him that it had got an entirely wrong angle on the position of affairs and was regarding him purely in the light of an intrusive stranger who had muscled in on its private sleeping quarters. Its manner was plainly resentful. It fixed Freddie with a cold yellow eye and curled its upper lip slightly, the better to display a long white tooth. It also twitched its nose and gave a sotto voce imitation of distant thunder. Freddie did not know quite what avenue to explore. It was impossible to climb between the sheets with a thing like that on the counterpane. To spend the night in a chair, on the other hand, would have been foreign to his policy. He did what I consider the most statesmanlike thing by sidling out onto the balcony and squinting along the wall of the house to see if there wasn't a lighted window hard by, behind which might lurk somebody who would rally round with aid and comfort. There was a lighted window, only a short distance away, so he shoved his head out as far as it would stretch and said, "I say." There being no response, he repeated, "I say." And finally, to drive his point home, he added, "I say, I say, I say." This time he got results. The head of Lady Prenderby suddenly protruded from the window. "Who," she inquired, "is making that abominable noise?" It was not precisely the attitude Freddie had hoped for, but he could take the rough with the smooth. "It's me, Widgeon, Frederick." "Must you sing on your balcony, Mr. Widgeon?" "I wasn't singing. I was saying, 'I say.'" "What were you saying?" "I say." "You say what?" I was saying, 'I say.' Kind of a heart cry, if you know what I mean. The fact is, there's a dog in my room." "What sort of dog?" A whacking great Alsatian. Ah, that would be Wilhelm. Good night, Mr. Widgeon. The window closed. Freddie let out a heart-stricken yip. But I say... The window reopened. Really, Mr. Widgeon? But what am I to do? Do? About this whacking great Alsatian? Lady Prenderby seemed to consider. No sweet biscuits, she said, and when the maid brings you your tea in the morning, please do not give him sugar, simply a little milk in the saucer. He is on a diet. Good night, Mr. Widgeon. Freddie was now pretty well nonplussed. No matter what his hostess might say about this beastly dog being on a diet, he was convinced from its manner that his medical advisor had not forbidden it widgeons, and once more he bent his brain to the task of ascertaining what to do next. There were several possible methods of procedure. His balcony being not so very far from the ground, he could, if he pleased, jump down and spend a health-giving night in the nasturtium bed. Or he might curl up on the floor. Or he might get out of the room and dance downstairs somewhere. This last scheme seemed about the best. The only obstacle in the way of its fulfillment was the fact that when he started for the door, his roommate might probably think he was a burglar about to loot silver of Lonely Country House and pin him. Still, it had to be risked. And a moment later, he might have been observed tiptoeing across the carpet with all the caution of a slackwire artist who isn't any too sure he remembers the correct steps. Well, it was a near thing. At the instant when he started, the dog seemed occupied with licking something that looked like a cushion on the bed. It was licking this object in a thoughtful way and paid no attention to Freddie till he was halfway across no man's land. Then it suddenly did a sort of sitting high jump in his direction, and 2 seconds later, Freddie, with a drafty feeling about the seat of his trouserings, was on top of a wardrobe, with the dog underneath, looking up. He tells me that if he ever moved quicker in his life, it was only on the occasion when, a lad of 14, he was discovered by his uncle, Lord Blister, smoking one of the latter's cigars in the library. And he rather thinks he must have clipped at least 1/5 of a second off the round, then set up. It looked to him now as if his sleeping arrangements for the night had been settled for him. And the thought of having to roost on top of a wardrobe at the whim of a dog was pretty dashed offensive to his proud spirit, as you may well imagine. However, as you cannot reason with Alsatians, it seemed the only thing to be done, and he was trying to make himself as comfortable as a sharp piece of wood sticking into the fleshy part of his leg would permit, when there was a snuffling noise in the passage, and through the door came an object which, in the dim light, he was at first not able to identify. It looked something like a pen wiper, and something like a piece of hearth rug. A second and keener inspection revealed it as a Pekingese puppy. The uncertainty which Freddie had felt as to the newcomer's status was shared, it appeared, by the Alsatian. For after raising its eyebrows in a puzzled manner, it rose and advanced inquiringly. In a tentative way, it put out a paw and rolled the intruder over. Then, advancing again, it lowered its nose and sniffed. It was a course of action against which its best friends would have advised it. These peaks are tough eggs, especially when, as in this case, female. They look the world in the eye and are swift to resent familiarity. There was a sort of explosion, and the next moment the Alsatian was shooting out of the room with its tail between its legs, hotly pursued. Freddie could hear the noise of the battle rolling away along the passage, and it was music to his ears. Something on these lines was precisely what that Alsatian had been asking for, and now it had got it. Presently the peak returned, dashing the beads of perspiration from its forehead, and came and sat down under the wardrobe, wagging a stumpy tail. And Freddie, feeling that the all clear had been blown, and that he was now at liberty to descend, did so. His first move was to shut the door. His second, to fraternize with his preserver. Freddie is a chap who believes in giving credit where credit is due, and it seemed to him that this peak had shown itself an ornament of its species. He spared no effort, accordingly, to entertain it. He lay down on the floor and let it lick his face 233 times. He tickled it under the left ear, the right ear, and at the base of the tail, in the order named. He also scratched its stomach. All these attentions the animal received with cordiality and marked gratification. And as it seemed still in pleasure-seeking mode, and had come to look upon him as the official master of the revels, Freddie, feeling that he could not disappoint it, but must play the host, no matter what the cost to himself, took off his tie and handed it over. He would not have done it for everybody, he says, but where this life-saving peak was concerned, the sky was the limit. Well, the tie went like a breeze. It was a success from the start. The peak chewed it and chased it and got entangled in it and dragged it across the room and was just starting to shake it from side to side when an unfortunate thing happened. Misjudging its distance, it banged its head a nasty wallop against the leg of the bed. There is nothing of the red Indian at the stake about a puppy in circumstances like this. A moment later, Freddie's blood was chilled by a series of fearful shrieks that seemed to ring through the night like the dying cries of the party of the second part of a first-class murder. It amazed him that a mere peak, and a juvenile peak at that, should have been capable of producing such an uproar. He says that a baronet stabbed in the back with a paper knife in his library could not have made half such a row. Eventually, the agony seemed to abate. Quite suddenly, as if nothing had happened, the peak stopped yelling and with an amused smile began to play with the tie again. And at the same moment, there was a sound of whispering outside and then a knock at the door. "Hello," said Freddie. "It is I, sir, Biggleswade." "Who's Biggleswade?" "The butler, sir." "What do you want?" "Her ladyship wishes me to remove the dog which you are torturing." There was more whispering. "Her ladyship also desires me to say that she will be reporting the affair in the morning to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals." There was another spot of whispering. "Her ladyship further instructs me to add that, should you prove recalcitrant, I am to strike you over the head with the poker." Well, you can't say this is pleasant for poor old Freddie, and he didn't think so himself. He opened the door to perceive without a group consisting of Lady Prenderby, her daughter Dahlia, a few assorted aunts, and the butler with poker. And he says he met Dahlia's eyes and they went through him like a knife. "Let me explain," he began. "Spare us the details," said Lady Prenderby with a shiver. She scooped up the peak and felt it for broken bones. But listen, good night, Mr. Widgeon." The aunt said good night too, and so did the butler. The girl Dahlia preserved a revolted silence. "But honestly, it was nothing, really. It banged its head against the bed." "What did he say?" asked one of the aunts, who was a little hard of hearing. "He says he banged the poor creature's head against the bed," said Lady Prenderby. "Dreadful," said the aunt. Hideous, said a second aunt. A third aunt opened up another line of thought. She said that with men like Freddie in the house, was anyone safe? She mooted the possibility of them all being murdered in their beds. And though Freddie offered to give her a written guarantee that he hadn't the slightest intention of going anywhere near her bed, the idea seemed to make a deep impression. Biggleswade, said Lady Prenderby. M'lady, you will remain in this passage for the remainder of the night with your poker. Very good, m'lady. Should this man attempt to leave the room, you will strike him smartly over the head. Just so, m'lady. But listen, said Freddie. Good night, Mr. Widgeon. The mob scene broke up. Soon the passage was empty, save for Biggleswade, the butler, who had begun to pace up and down, halting every now and then to flick the air with his poker, as if testing the lissomeness of his wrist muscles and satisfying himself that they were in a condition to ensure the right amount of follow-through. The spectacle he presented was so unpleasant that Freddie withdrew into his room and shut the door. His bosom, as you may imagine, was surging with distressing emotions. That look which Dahlia Prenderby had given him had churned him up to no little extent. He realized that he had a lot of tense thinking to do, and to assist thought, he sat down on the bed. Or, rather, to be accurate, on the dead cat, which was lying on the bed. It was this cat which the Alsatian had been licking just before the final breach in his relations with Freddie. The object, if you remember, which the latter had supposed to be a cushion. He leaped up as if the corpse, instead of being cold, had been piping hot. He stared down, hoping against hope that the animal was merely in some sort of coma, but a glance told him that it had made the great change. He had never seen a deader cat. After life's fitful fever, it slept well. You wouldn't be far out in saying that poor old Freddie was now appalled. Already his reputation in this house was at zero, his name mud. On all sides he was looked upon as Widgeon, the amateur vivisectionist. This final disaster could not but put the tin hat on it. Before he had had a faint hope that in the morning, when calmer moods would prevail, he might be able to explain that matter of the peak. But who was going to listen to him if he were discovered with a dead cat on his person? And then the thought came to him that it might be possible not to be discovered with it on his person. He had only to nip downstairs and deposit the remains in the drawing room or somewhere, and suspicion might not fall upon him. After all, in a super-catted house like this, cats must always be dying like flies all over the place. A housemaid would find the animal in the morning and report to GHQ that the cat's strength of the establishment had been reduced by 1. And then there would be a bit of tut-tutting and perhaps a silent tear or two, and then the thing would be forgotten. The thought gave him new life. All briskness and efficiency, he picked up the body by the tail and was just about to dash out of the room when, with a silent groan, he remembered Biggleswade. He peeped out. It might be that the butler, once the eye of authority had been removed, had departed to get the remainder of his beauty sleep. But no. Service and fidelity were evidently the watchwords of Matcham Scratchings. There the fellow was, still practicing half-arm shots with the poker. Freddie closed the door. And as he did so, he suddenly thought of the window. There lay the solution. Here he had been fooling about with doors and thinking in terms of drawing rooms, and all the while there was the balcony staring him in the face. All he had to do was to shoot the body out into the silent night and let gardeners, not housemaids, discover it. He hurried out. It was a moment for swift action. He raised his burden. He swung it to and fro, working up speed. Then he let it go. And from the dark garden, there came suddenly the cry of a strong man in his anger. "Who threw that cat?" It was the voice of his host, Sir Mortimer Prenderby. "Show me the man who threw that cat," he thundered. Windows flew up. Heads came out. Freddie sank to the floor of the balcony and rolled against the wall. "Whatever is the matter, Mortimer?" "Let me get at the man who hit me in the eye with a cat." "A cat?" Lady Prenderby's voice sounded perplexed. "Are you sure?" "Sure? What do you mean, sure? Of course I'm sure. I was just dropping off to sleep in my hammock when suddenly a great beastly cat came whizzing through the air and caught me properly in the eyeball. It's a nice thing. A man can't sleep in hammocks in his own garden without people pelting him with cats. I insist on the blood of the man who threw that cat." "Where did it come from?" "Must have come from that balcony there." "Mr. Widgeon's balcony," said Lady Prenderby in an acid voice. "As I might have guessed." Sir Mortimer uttered a cry. "So might I have guessed. Widgeon, of course, that ugly fella. He's been throwing cats all the evening. I've got a nasty sore place on the back of my neck where he hit me with one before dinner. Oh, I want my heavy cane, the one with the carved ivory handle, or a horsewhip will do." "Wait, Mortimer," said Lady Prenderby. "Do nothing rash. The man is evidently a very dangerous lunatic. I will send Biggleswade don't know what happened there, to overpower him. He has the kitchen poker." Little, said the crumpet, remains to be told. At 2:15 that morning, a sombre figure in dress clothes without a tie limped into the little railway station of Lower Smattering on the Whistle, some 6 miles from Matcham Scratchings. At 3:47 it departed Londonwards on the up milk train. It was Frederick Widgeon. He had a broken heart and blisters on both heels, and in that broken heart was that loathing for all cats of which you recently saw so signal a manifestation. I'm revealing no secrets when I tell you that Frederick Widgeon is permanently through with cats. From now on, they cross his path at their peril. And that is Goodbye to All Cats by P.G. Wodehouse. I find it delicious. I hope you do too. And of course, I'm dedicating it to all my friends with cats. And I was a cat person all my life. Unfortunately, the allergies won't allow it now. But to everybody who has cats, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm very sad to have said goodbye to all cats. But those of you who still enjoy their company, bless you. And that's it for tonight. Thank you so much, my dears. I'll see you next Wednesday at 6 o'clock for another episode of Tales and Cocktails. Thank you so much. Bye now.